Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 263, and I had a conversation with Dr. Joshua Smith. He's an evangelical pastor and is the author of Robotic Persons, Our Future with Social Robots. This was a fascinating conversation for me and hopefully for you too. Firstly, I'd never spoken with an evangelical pastor before. I had my own concept of what that means, and so it was really exciting for me to have a conversation with somebody that, explained to me what their vision of their belief system is and how they see the world at large, how he chooses to address his congregation, what he feels about the Word of God and the Bible, and it was really cool. He was super open and extraordinarily honest with his feelings about things, so I really appreciated that. The AI stuff, extra exciting for me. It's right up my alley. We talked about robotic personhood. We talked about what it means to be in a world operating now with sex robots, companion robots, robots that are capable of war, robots that are perhaps taking over jobs or going to be a blessing in that way or a curse in that way. Such a fascinating guy and great conversation. I'm really stoked that I got a chance to talk to him. I recommend reading his book. It's fascinating. He draws on so many different philosophies and thinkers. It was just cool. Super duper cool. So I'm excited for you to hear this one. In other news, the usual stuff, social media, Hey Human Podcast can be found on Facebook and Instagram. Susan Ruthism is my personal social media. That's Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Susan at Hey Human Podcast, if you want to drop me an email. I always look forward to those, so please do that. If you go to heyhumanpodcast.com, you will find a links page. Every episode, including this one, has a bevy of links for you to click on and learn more about my guest, and if they have books or articles or thoughts or whatever, I try and get a pile of all that stuff together in one place for you, make it easy for you to discover more about the conversation and about the guests that I have on every week. So lots and lots and lots of links on that links page. Also on heyhumanpodcast.com is the store where you can get Hey Human merch, t-shirts, hats, all sorts of things, knickknacks. So definitely check that out. It's a great way to support the podcast. Another great way to support the podcast is to rate and review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It's super duper helpful. I cannot stress this enough. If you have been listening to this show, if you're new to this show or a longtime listener, please take a few minutes and rate and review on iTunes. It's really helpful and pushes it up through the algorithms, the bizarro world of of robot brain. So definitely do that if you get the chance. SusanRuth.com if you want to learn more about me personally, and you can also sign up for the mailing list there. I send out mailers every, 4, 5, 6 months. And if you are into music, I have 4 records out in the world, and you can find me under Susan Ruth on iTunes or Spotify. Probably lots of places. I'm sure on Amazon, which basically has everything at this point. So, anyway, thank you for listening, everyone. Stay safe, be kind, be well, take care of each other. We're journeying into a new unknown of masks, no masks, what's going on in the world. Some places it's still totally shut down. Just be gentle with each other. We're all doing the best we can, and people's nerves are frazzled and fried, and there's excitement in the air, and there's confusion, and there's stress, and, we're all doing the best we can. So hang in there for each other, and we'll get through it, because that's what humans do. We are resilient, if nothing else. All right. Thank you. Let's do this. Here we go. Joshua Smith, welcome to Hey Human.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. You wrote Robotic Persons, Our Future with Social Robots. And there's so much stuff that I want to talk about with you about the book. But before we dig into that, what I like to do with all my guests is find out about you as a human, like where you came from, what inspired you. You're an evangelical pastor, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's a particular path. So let's go back to the
Yeah.
beginning. What's childhood? Where'd you grow up? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, so very central part of the state. And I was raised by my grandmother, and she was a believer. My grandfather wasn't. Very strange situation. My dad had just gotten out of prison for doing some stuff, and my mom had my brother, and she left, and they kind of went on their own journey. And so I was just there with my grandmother, and life was good in that regard. And then, we didn't really go to church or anything. But I do remember my grandmother praying for me every night. And I didn't really make sense of that until later. But anyway, she passed away and when I was 15, and just had a lot of struggles with that. And because I knew she was a believer, and I didn't know what that meant, but I knew she believed in God. And that really upset me. And so I went down a very different path, and, typical teenage stuff.
Which part upset you? It upset you that she believed in God, or upset you because she died, which clearly would upset you?
Yeah, it upset me because, I didn't understand why, God would allow that to happen. So, if, there was an all-loving God who wanted to take care of his people, then, why did my grandmother die? And, my grandfather went on to live and get married again. Like it didn't seem right to me. So that's what upset me.
Did you have a lot of issues dealing with the fact, firstly, a father in prison, a mom who leaves you with another brother? There's a lot of abandonment wrapped up in that. And then from the way you're talking, I'm assuming your relationship with your grandfather wasn't as close as with your grandmother. So then your grandmother dies, which is more stuff. That's a lot for a kid to carry.
Yeah. And that's not all of it. And so my mom and my stepmother, so my dad remarried when I was young. They're both bipolar, clinically bipolar. And so I think that didn't help either with some of the issues that I had. Like I thought I was just insane because, the way that some of bipolar, manic depressive can manifest is people just make up stories, and it gets worse. Like it's just, there's different forms of it, but the ones that I experienced was, pathological lying and just complete disconnect from reality. And so, but in their minds, it's real like this. And so I dealt with that, a lot of really bad situations. And I just kind of gave up on life, just really in general. And just experimented with a lot of different drugs and a lot of alcohol, a lot of escapism, and like to the extreme, right? Not like just dabbling in it, but like I just wanted to be numb, and that's why I did it. And so, I did that for a while, and I wanted to go to art school. I couldn't afford it. We were poor. And the military about that time, they came around to our high schools and they started, that you had to do the ASVAB test. I don't know if y'all had to do that in high school, but we had to take it. And once you take it, they start hounding you basically to enlist, especially if you're in the demographics that I was in. And, they start advertising money and all this stuff. And so I wanted to go to school, and nobody in my family had went to college. And I think mom nor dad graduated from high school. And so this was my one shot to really get away from small town. And so, I took it. And that kind of changed the trajectory of my life because that gave me money for the first time. It gave me income, but it also gave me a chance to get away from friends and my girlfriend at the time, and to really think about life and think about death in a way I hadn't really before. And
did you have an absence of belief at that time, like no belief in God?
Oh yeah, I had. So, I came to school one day really high, like pupils really dilated, and one of my teachers pulled me aside and said, obviously you're intoxicated. And, would you come to church with me, basically? And he says, I know you're depressed. I know you're hurting and all this stuff. And so I said, yeah. And, he just allowed me to ask a lot of questions. I was very angry, snarky, those type of things. I've always been a cynic, skeptic, just sarcastic. And he put up with a lot of that. And I think that kind of opened the door for me that, maybe there's more to it than just another form of escapism, or that this is just something people made up. And, these people really believe this. And, this teacher was very intellectual. I respected him. And so it kind of opened me up to it a little bit. And then when I went to, when I joined the military, it went a little bit deeper, because I started thinking about, this was during the Iraq War, and, they're telling us you're going to die, basically, and all this stuff. And so, I just thought about it a lot more, and I started going to church on and off post for a while. And
hold up, they told you you're going to die? What was that?
Yeah.
Well, like, you're here and you're not going to make it because this is hell on earth kind of thing, or what?
Well, no, it's like, so there's a very strategic process that you go through when you enter basic, like the first thing you kind of do, like the indoctrination part of it. Not indoctrination like a cult, but basically that's what it's thought of. It's, you're training, you're taking somebody who's a civilian,
right,
and showing them that you're now part of a machine, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, there is that, but it's also a desensitizing to what the war machine is. And so you kind of have to have that mentality to walk into that. Yeah. And I think in some ways, that's kind of what I thought would actually happen anyway. I don't know. It's just kind of like you kind of buy into this. That's what a hero does. And so I don't know, I kind of have a superhero complex, and so I kind of wanted that in a sense, but I know that sounds really morbid, but that's kind of what we all wanted. So if you take somebody and you train them to play baseball or whatever, piano, they want to do that thing, right? That's what they're trained for. And so the way that it works in the military, especially with combat, fields, is you train for those jobs, and then you want to do that job. And it's a complex psychological process that you go through. And I talk about that in the book a little bit, but it's a very real process where you learn how to disassociate the act of killing and the nature of what war is, and the cost of it all, the ethics behind it. And you really kind of boil it down to, this is my job and this is what I'm doing to provide or whatever, or to provide safety for the citizens of the U.S. and the greater good and all that stuff. So yeah, I thought about death a pretty good bit, and that kind of fueled some of that research. Is there life after death? Is there a God? Is it real? Is it just something like Freud and others said, that we are just kind of numbing and escaping through this thing we call religion? And the research that I did, it pointed to a different direction. And yeah, in some ways it is a crutch. It is, but I believe that it's real, and you can't prove otherwise that it's not. And I have warrant for the beliefs that I have justification for them, and I found those along the way and in different points. And it took a long time to get to kind of to where my faith is now. But all along the way, there are people to help and guide and kind of assist, and some people wanted to hurt me, and some people wanted to take advantage. But thankfully, I kind of made it through that. And so, yeah, there's always been people who oppose my current worldview, and that challenge has always kind of pressed me deeper into what I believe. And so I think that's been a beneficial thing to me, that, I was surrounded by guys who were atheists, who did good things. They were moral, but also was surrounded by people who said they were Christian, who cheated on their wife and bought prostitutes and all kinds of crazy stuff, who, were deacons of churches and different things. And so I saw a lot of dichotomies, and I think the military kind of helped broaden some of my perspectives, especially dealing with different cultures. And so there was a lot of negative, but there's also some positives to that experience. And I think it definitely kind of helped my journey of faith in a lot of ways. And so, and then after that, do you have a question? Sorry.
No. Oh, I did, but I don't know if, as an evangelical person, which I'd like you to explain to listeners what that means, because I think people have ideas as to what that means, especially lately in the political realm. It's taken on this whole other idea, an ideology. So definitely, I want to talk about what that means to you, and also as a person who did experience other cultures and other ways of life, and understanding that not everyone believes the same thing. Where does that fit in with your worldview about, say, heaven and hell, or morality and things like that?
Yeah.
Big question.
Well, no, that is, our influences and our preferences, they're kind of influenced by our culture and in our environment. And so the easiest answer to that, the reason why I got into this branch of Christianity, or this subculture of it, is because that's what I was invited to initially, and the more I looked into it, the more I felt like I aligned with that. And so you can take that for what it's worth. But the evangelical aspect of it is, for me, and what I think it is in its original context, is that we are solely grounded in what we find and read in Scripture. So that's kind of our source of authority. And I know there's different opinions about Scripture, and so it's a closed system for us. So we don't believe that there's any new books coming out, and there's this long history of what's called textual criticism, where we collected thousands upon thousands of manuscripts from Latin, Hebrew, Syriac, just thousands of manuscripts, and we take them and we compile them, and we see that there's this textual tree that is all, the books of Isaiah, or, the books of the Old Testament, New Testament. And we see those as a collective whole. They're different, right? There's 66 of them. And we see this witness throughout history where coming out of different portions of history, that people believed these stories. They wrote them down, right? They originated in oral culture, but they wrote them down eventually, probably after the Babylonian captivity. And so there's these collections, there's these textual traditions, and they come out. And then, we believe that Jesus comes in the first century. There's this man named Jesus, and he's calling himself the Messiah. He's saying that all the Old Testament prophecies that the Jewish tradition has talked about are pointing to him. And so there's a lot of controversy over that in the first century, so much so that they kill him, and they think he's a blasphemer and all this stuff. But from that, there are, the 12 disciples, and then this guy named Paul, and he writes 13 books of the New Testament. And the disciples write some books and others, and they compile them. And then the early church fathers study these books, and they further analyze them, and they compile them into what we have now as the Bible. And so that's kind of our source of tradition and foundation, is at least what we believe. And And so we don't have a pope. We don't have a major figure in our hierarchy. We believe that the local church is its own source of authority in a sense that's grounded upon the Bible. Now, as you mentioned, that can break down when the system does not work properly, right? So it entails that, one, people are going to actually study the Bible for themselves, and that they're going to be able to read it. And so that was the Catholic Church's concern during the Protestant Reformation, is that the Catholic Church was concerned that people wouldn't be able to read the Bible for themselves. And I think that has been true for a good many years. And so the modern day evangelical movement, and there's books out there, Jesus and John Wayne. If you haven't read that, it's a really good, I mean, it's painful to read as an evangelical, but it's very true about how we got so tied into politics and so tied into certain political figures, and never really kind of diving into going back to the source of our faith and foundation, which is the revealed word of God in Scripture, and kind of assuming that these people, because they're charismatic, because they're likable, and they talk with eloquent speech and all these things, they became a new source for a lot of Christians, and that has been horribly affected the local church, and especially with the whole Trump movement, which was just very disturbing in a lot of different ways. And I have people in my church that, voted for him because the main thing that I've heard was because they didn't want Hillary to win. And I was like, it's kind of the lesser of two evils thing. And then nobody wins in those scenarios. And I don't know
it depends on what you consider evil too, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Everything is on the scale of what your personhood and what your soul finds bad.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say this in the most without offending anyone, but I mean that's basically what it is. You pick your team based on whatever it means for you, how it reflects back upon yourself.
Yeah, and so that's a good point, because a lot of people, so if there is a God, which I do believe there's a God. Like if there's a God, if you believe in the laws of physics, if you believe in the law of causality and all these things, that, things don't just come into being by accident, right? If there's a cause, there's an effect, those type of things. And so there has to be something behind this universe, right? But it's also slowly unraveling. And so we're not just going to lead to a new creation of another world just once this one burns up. It's leading towards destruction and, demise. And
are you talking about the expansion of the universe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And some people believe that it will expand back into itself and just start the whole process, which is a fun idea to if you think of humans and the universe at large and everything that is within it, all the great of everything, that if it is a sentient thing knowing itself, it makes sense that it would expand as far as it can and then break down back into itself and then begin again. I mean, it's a great way. I mean, it's a metaphor through the seasons, through the Christ rebirth story, through many of the ancient texts of rebirth stories. It's not like Jesus was the first one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fascinating.
It is. So I don't know if I answered your question fully, but basically, if you want to boil it down, evangelicalism should be or ought to be that the Bible is the source and foundation of our morality and also the purpose of our life. To what end do we, live? And, I mean, clearly it's two major things for Jesus were that we love our neighbor and that we love God. And there's a ton of ethical and just crazy stories in there that are really difficult to read and hard to understand, and that we don't take lightly either. And so,
yeah, well, that's why metaphor and story, and I think a lot of I feel like Jesus had a good sense of humor, and nobody really gets what I'm saying when I say that. But there are moments in the Bible where he sort of says things and you can almost hear the twinkle in his eyes when he's saying it, because he's like, y'all figure this stuff out. I can't do everything for you, which I love. And in part, I think your answer helps answer the other question I had, which is the worldview of other people's belief systems. Because as Gandhi famously said, I love your Christ, it's your Christians that I have issue with. Because a Christ figure, a Jesus figure, it's not, he didn't turn his back on anyone, right?
Yeah. So. I think that's important. And even Camus, who was an atheist, I believe, or at least agnostic, maybe he wouldn't claim to be an atheist, but definitely not a believer. And, he said to Christians, we can relate to one another in our efforts to do good to humanity. And I'm paraphrasing one of his speeches there, but basically he said if Christians acted like Jesus, if they were truly reflective of Jesus, there would not be any suffering children and afflicted
of
women.
Any faith. Yeah.
And so I think that's very important to me, especially as I try to relate to other people. And I firmly believe that all humans, we are intertwined in a way, not in like a Buddhist way or anything like that, but we're intertwined in a way that I can't treat you harmfully without harming myself. And so I think that is a biblical principle as well, is that
it is Buddhist too.
Yeah,
it's both.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But I mean, let's be honest, that all the major and some minor religions of the world, they all have a golden rule, all of them.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that, and who knows? Who knows if God exists or not? That's where faith comes in. But the truth of the matter is, truth of the capital T is, if you say, prove that God exists, I say, prove that God doesn't exist. Just as you can say, prove God doesn't exist. And then somebody can say, prove that God exists. I mean, it's a moot argument. And that's why faith is so important.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can look for the most logical, kind of conclusion. I think that's kind of where I go. I can't prove, empirically that this is true, or, I can give rationales for what I believe. And I think we should, I think I don't ask anybody to just believe anything blindly. And that's not what I teach my daughters or my my son, or even my our church members. That I want you to look for yourself. And if I tell you something untrue, then you need to do something different, and you need to hold each other accountable, myself included. That and that's just kind of something I hold to, because everybody is corruptible to a certain extent. And myself included. And so, what happens when good intentions go bad? And we see what happens, and that's the way of the world in so many ways. And so, I think that keeps us humble. It keeps us open to our mistakes, and done in love, it can be edifying, not in a way that harms people. I tell people all the time, I'm not your judge. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help. And definitely, if you ask me what I believe on something, I'll tell you, and it may hurt your feelings, but that's not what I want to do. And certainly not, I don't like conflict, but I also don't believe in being dishonest with you or anyone. So, you have to hold it in balance, and it's really hard sometimes.
I feel like your childhood prepared you well for something like that.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely did in a lot of ways.
Because otherwise you wouldn't be able to have conversations with people that are going through their own darkness. We have to go through our own fires in order to understand other people's journey through the fire. Yeah. I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely helped. I definitely wouldn't want to go, like, if I had to choose, I wouldn't choose to I would want to be my family to be complete and holistic,
Sure.
like the one my wife went through and experienced, but that's just not what happened. And so I think it does make me less judgmental of people. Um, not I'm saying I'm humble or anything, but that I kind of understand why somebody might want to be addicted to something, or why they might want to escape, or why they might want to kill themselves or other things. I understand those feelings, and I've had many opportunities to kind of share with people and help them through that process. And so, yeah, I'm not thankful for those experiences necessarily, because they really hurt. And there's still a lot of scar tissue from it, but I am thankful that I've been able to help some people in a limited sense through those experiences. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's a big leap from being a person of faith to then becoming a pastor. How did you make that call?
Well, it's, so people in the church that I kind of went in and out of always kind of put me in leadership positions, even though I was, desperately shy. And I'm 100% an introvert. So it makes it odd that what I do for a living is public speaking. So I'm always uncomfortable, but that's okay. I'm kind of comfortable with that now. But yeah, the transition was, I was in Iraq 2010, 2011, and just thinking through how I was going to transition out. And I wanted to go to seminary and study religion or study theology. And I thought I might be a professor. Like, I thought that's what I was going to end up doing. And so, I kind of made up my mind once I got out, which was the next step. Once I got back home, that I was going to go to school. And through doing that, I took the first step to where I am today, which is becoming a part of the ministry. And so actually had no kind of inkling to do that ever, or what I'm doing now. And so I got back, and my wife and I started going to a church, and immediately I was asked to start a college ministry and teach college students. So I did that, and that led to another position, and then another, and then we moved up north to British Columbia for a while and helped the church up there, and then moved back and helped another church in Mississippi. And then I kind of felt like, maybe God was saying that it's time for me to start doing this as a full-time position. And so that's kind of the short story. And all along the way, we kind of value discernment and input from others. And so it's not something you just say, hey, I want to do this, and then the next week, like you kind of have to be invited to it. Or I think that's how it should be. You shouldn't just be like, hey, I want to do this, and because so-and-so did it. And so each point in my transition is kind of like, why do you want to do this? And, it's a very scrutinizing process, or at least the one I went through. And so I think that's helped me a lot to discern that this is not just something like I don't just want to teach, but I'm actually pretty decent at it, and I like doing it, and people like being on the opposite end of it. Not that I'm the best teacher or whatever, but yeah, I do enjoy it a lot now. And
but you get to be teacher, philosopher,
yeah,
pastor, obviously, therapist. I'm sure there's a lot of things that are wrapped up into that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, if I could describe it simply, it's like being a small business owner, but also an undertrained counselor and, an educator of a small school. And so like dealing with all those things, and grant writer and all that kind of stuff, because you're dealing with a lot of different issues, and people trust you, and they kind of invite you to the most intimate parts of their life. but they also expect you to be informed on all types of ethics and philosophy and theology. And so I get like just random questions off the cuff all the time. And so I do read very widely, and I think that pays great dividends in how I can respond to people, and also just appreciating where people come from in different worldviews, because not everybody had the same experience that I had, or not everybody's had the same amount of education. And, I think total hours of, graduate, undergraduate, and postdoc work is like almost 250 hours of coursework that I had to go through to get to where I am.
And you're a doctor of theology? Doctor of theology?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a lot. It's way more than what you would kind of go through just to be like the PhD in math or PhD in biology or whatever. It's double at every point. And I think unnecessarily so, but that's what it is. So,
although a great theologian knows history, knows science, knows philosophy, knows the great thinkers of the world, knows the texts that aren't talked about, knows the Gnostics. There's a lot of content.
Yeah, it is. So, yeah, we read a lot.
And I could tell when I read your book that you dug in to different thinkers, which I was excited about because, again, the painted picture of evangelical is these days a very narrow lens, which is one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the show too, because I think that's an unfair viewpoint. I know it's not actually true. Of course, there's all types of people. So and after reading the book, I was like, ooh, this is going to be interesting because it's clear that you are a deep thinker. And those are my favorite kinds of people.
Well, mine too. So, yeah.
I was excited.
There's a lot of really deep people in this tradition. And I hate some of what has happened. And to be honest, it's fair. Like, we've earned that reputation that we have now, by all means. So I'm not apologizing for it, but yeah, I mean, but there's also a small segment of the people that I've interacted with, and there's so many good people here who are not educated, but they are very good people, and they would give you the shirt off their back and would do anything for their neighbor and love them well. And so I'm not ashamed of them in our community. I'm ashamed of people who misrepresent what we're called to be, and or that they're so tied to a label or a sect of Christianity that they forget kind of the broader picture of what we're called to do and be united in Christ. And and we can't do that by some of the stupidity that has happened over the last 10, 12, 20 years. And so, and it just change moves slow. It moves really slow, but I think people hopefully will kind of open their eyes that this is so much bigger than one denomination of faith. And this is our brand that we like. But there are other people. There are Catholics who are definitely going to heaven. Presbyterians. There's so many different brands of Christianity that I believe they truly understand too. We disagree on certain things, but kind of the foundational theology that we kind of have to go to is what do you believe about Jesus? And that's why in my book that I use him as a rubric. Like if I'm going to understand something, and we look at work, war, and sexuality, then I want to understand how Jesus thought about it. I don't care necessarily what the early church fathers thought, although it's helpful, but they're not my guiding light through that. And so he's kind of the main philosopher that I'm trying to understand and unpack. And all this other stuff on the peripheral is fine and it's helpful, but it can also, if we hitch our wagon to it, so to speak, we can get led astray by a certain theological brand that we just really like, whether that be Reformed theology or, we want to follow this theologian. And I think even Paul would say, be careful of that because it can lead you astray. And so, continually look at Christ and how he treated people and how he loved people who are not like him, who are different, who are considered others. And so that really kind of launched me into robots and just the very strong emotional response people have to whether or not robots can be a part of our community. And it was interesting.
I definitely want to dig into the book. I have one more question about your past. Do you still have contact with, your parents or your sibling and stuff like that? And then forgiveness, because I think forgiveness is it's big for me. I'm fascinated by the topic. I think it's infinitely interesting. And so where are you on that?
Well, I talk to my mom and my dad on a pretty regular basis now. My grandmother was like my mother, and I think it was hard for me when my mom wanted to come back into my life in my 20s. It was really hard for me because I kind of had moved on, and but for her, she felt a lot of shame. And, obviously, and there's some other things that I can't talk about that she went through. And I understand in a way, and so I've forgiven her, forgiven my dad, and I love them both. But I think it's hard for them to be around me because that draws out feelings of the past. And even though you say it's okay, let's just move on, it's like that trauma, it's just kind of, they're stuck in a cycle. And until they kind of deal with their own demons and stuff, they can't deal with it. They don't want to be around me sometimes. And, I invite them. And my mom's been here. She's come to church here. My dad's come a couple times. And, but I don't see them regularly. I wish I would. And I think about that too, because when I do funerals and stuff, like you said, one of the things that I often talk about is reconciliation. And, but we have to be careful, I think too, because forgiveness it's a two-way, reconciliation is a two-way street, until that person kind of acknowledges, hey, I hurt you. Can you forgive me? I don't think there can be any real kind of healing. I think you can forgive the person for sure. And I think there are some hurts, especially dealing with cases of sexual abuse and those type of things, where I'm not sure that person's ever really going to get to a place of forgiveness, just pragmatically. And we've dealt with some pretty serious ones. And so, and I don't try to make light of that either. Like, oh, you should just forgive that person. But they're like, the person doesn't even acknowledge they did it, and they just lie. And so that's kind of propagating the hurt. And I don't think that's where it should go. And so I think, you can forgive the person because you don't want to damage your own soul and being and kind of let that devour you. But understand that you can't control that other person. And so forgiveness and reconciliation, I think, is the end goal. And I want that for people. But if the other party does not reciprocate that, or, like my stepmom, she's just completely off the grid, completely gone, and she'll never acknowledge the things that she put me through. She'll never acknowledge the things she put my sister through, and like deep psychological hurt. And so I don't think we'll ever have reconciliation. I mean, she might one day, but I think in her mind, physically, it's not possible for her because that's not in her reality.
Yeah.
So I'm still struggling with some of those things, to be transparent. And I know what I want is to be reconciled to all people in all things. But the harsh reality of life is that it doesn't always work out like we want. And thankfully, that's the beauty of Christ and the gospel, and the good news is that he does come to reconcile all things to himself. And so on this side of eternity, it doesn't flesh out like we want, but we should pursue that to the best of our ability. But I caution people sometimes that they make that their ultimate goal in life, and it's a good goal. But in cases of extreme harm, like, abusive husband, abusive relationships, that I think that there's another tier of treatment that needs to be had and help. And so it's complicated. But for me, I definitely want it. But I just don't know if it's fully possible in all ways.
Yeah. You bring up such a great point about forgiveness. For me, it's that thing. It's like, okay, I forgive the transgression, I forgive the person who hurt me greatly. However, there's that parenthetical. That person has never, ever once said, I'm sorry, or I did this to you. And so, yeah, it does leave this place of pain that doesn't ever really go. Not really. You can kind of turn your back on it and be like, oh yeah, it's somewhere back there. But it triggers on things, because it will always be there because that other person doesn't acknowledge it. Yeah.
So we deal with that a lot as pastors, and in our own hearts, but also in others. We deal with those emotional scars a lot, and so it's an emotional job. But I think definitely the body keeps the score, and once you kind of go through some traumatic event, which everybody does at some point, and the way that it's so crazy how it can manifest physically in your body, and so in a lot of ways, we're trying to help people kind of deal with their trauma, and whether it's perceived or actual. And so even the military kind of helped with some of that. They didn't physically help, but helped me think about it with PTSD and kind of seeing some of my friends who kind of went through more difficult situations, and just the absurdity of that experience. And but yeah, I've seen some really great transformational things happen in people's lives, coming out of addiction, coming out of abuse, and they live totally different lives now. But then on the other side, I've seen people for no reason that I can understand just completely give up, and that they're living their life in a way that nobody, consumed by drugs and all kind of other things. And so you're like, what happened in their life? And something did. I think there has to be something physical that manifested or whatever, and they just didn't deal with it, or
don't remember, or for sure.
So
humans, huh? Complicated. I love that phrase you said, on this side of eternity. It's so great.
Yeah. You'll hear that a lot in evangelical worlds.
Oh, really? I love it.
Yeah.
It's such a great way to think about things. All right, let's dig into the book. Robotic Dominion, whether or not they deserve personhood, what it means to use robots in war or as companions for sex, for sexual deviance, all that, quote unquote, I'll put that around because, one man's deviance is another man's good time, I suppose.
Yep.
So let's dig into this. So you started thinking about robots. That's interesting. For a man of faith and humanity, how did that come to be? Other than, I suppose, the Iraq War, in which robots were used, as you mentioned in the book, robots are used in war.
Yeah. Well, my experience with robots kind of goes back to high school, and I program some of the robots you would see, which I mean, that was 10, 12 years ago. So they're not the same now, but some of the automation that we use for developing or producing cars and manufacturing plants. So I got some experience with those and thought that's pretty interesting. I like it. You know, I'm an introvert. I like the just isolation of it, and the robot's not going to talk to me. It's not going to fuss at me or whatever. If I make a mistake, it's just there. And I feel like I kind of understand it, and, you know, doesn't have feelings or whatever. So that's kind of where I got into it. And after high school, I obviously did not go directly into college or anything, but I ended up at the latter part of my career, after 6 years, working with this massive robot that was an anti-mortar and rocket defense robot. And and so we were the maintainers of that system, and it was really neat, I thought. And so that got me thinking about it. And I didn't really think about it much more after that until, Westworld came out, and Westworld really kind of, because I've been studying philosophy of mind and really interested in that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to know more about that from the perspective of the story found in Westworld and how they were dealing with cognitive science and all this stuff. And so that really kind of pushed me more into it and dealing with androids and other things. And so I just approached one of my professors and said, hey, I want to do a directed study just on AI. And I kind of launched from there. And that's really what became the book is those two studies that I did, 6 months of research. And then I launched that into my dissertation. And so, and the dissertation became the book. So that, a good 2 years.
As I was reading it, I wondered, I thought, this reads sort of like a dissertation. I wonder if that was the
impetus.
Yeah. Okay. I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so there was nothing out there like it. And even scholars in the field would say, philosophers in the field said this is really the first kind of evangelical approach to this topic. And it's not the first Christian approach, but in the way that I did it, it's very much unique. And its own kind of subgenre of robotic studies. And so when I started to pitch it to publishers, they were like, what in the world? No, we don't really understand how to sell this book, and we don't know who would buy it. But once I started to kind of help people see, like, this is what it's really about, and these things exist. They're not like these, imaginative humanoid robots that you think about when you see Westworld, but these are real practical robots that you're going to see in life. And some of them exist, some of them don't. But
they will.
Yeah, but they will, and they're closer than you think.
Yeah.
And so, not in a Westworld type of way, not that, but how they're being used to kind of manipulate and deceive and take advantage of. I think that's what really kind of disturbed me. And then how a lot of Christians, they think about technology as just a tool. Like, it's just a piece of technology that I use. It's not good or bad. And, this book is kind of a challenge to that there's embedded goodness or badness kind of in the technology that you make. And so if you make a sex doll, its purpose, its being is to, be an object of sex and to be an object basically of rape. And so is that something that we want to make? And no, I don't think that's a good thing to make. And yes, there are arguments for why people might make it. But I think the biggest kind of undercurrent to that is people want to buy them, so let's make them. And that's that's
the truth for all things, is it?
Right.
Not?
Yeah. But there's a big danger. This is not just, and even you could argue with pornography and stuff, there's a danger to it. Although in my research, not a lot of people said that there was, especially from a, psychological standpoint. which is a totally different topic, but it comes up in the book. And I just challenge that there is a such thing as good and bad sexuality, in a sense of, whether it's good or bad to have sex with a robot. And I don't see much good from it. But we could argue, both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating topic for sure. I'd like to break it down because, again, your book is really touching on three things. So labor, war, and then sex and companionship. So and also really clear, to be clear, a second ago you said it's the AI's rights you are considering in the sexuality component. Am I right about that?
Yeah, so I think the focus, just to be clear, the focus of the rights in personhood movement is the protection of the human entity. Now, how we're going about it is a little bit different because of the way the law works now. And the law actually favors automation. It favors AI and incorporating that into more businesses. And so my concern and others' concern is that people are going to use this technology to take advantage of it, to use it for financial gain, or not considering the philosophical implications of making this technology. And so we're talking about a very selective AI or social robot. And we're not talking about all rights. We're talking about very strict legal rights that might protect humans via those rights. And so, and that's kind of what I get into in the book, is that we're talking about legal personhood. We're not talking about moral personhood, which is what you and I share as humans. So it's not, hey, let's just grant them humanness, or let's just give them all rights, habeas corpus, but that individually we select certain ones that for certain reasons need to have a select form of personhood or select form of legal rights, so that more harm is not caused or potential harm can be arbitrated and different things like that. So
it's a fascinating subject. I mean, I gotta admit, reading this, I was like, my God, this actually creates more questions in my brain. This would be a great class in like a postmodern college class.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that.
Yeah, just and AI in general. I mean, if you follow Boston Dynamics at all, those little dudes are getting more and more scary as you go. And then they're using police dog robots. That there's a whole ethical ramification behind all that. But let's start first with labor, because you do break it down. I think it will just be easier to do it this way. So, what is your argument there?
Yeah, and so there's an argument that we shouldn't fear the automation of work, because the automation of work is going to lead to a utopia, right? And there was a movie, Bliss, that came out on Amazon, where people basically have to recreate the old world so people can experience bliss, because the modern world is, everybody has a fixed income, they make tons of money, it's all comfort, etc. And so there's people who are arguing that that's the reality we're heading towards. And if you look at the future of work, different books, let's see, Automation and Utopia, The Future of Work. There's other ones that talk about this is where it's headed. Okay, so economists, philosophers believe that's where we're headed. And they believe that's a good thing, because then we'll be able to pursue more leisure, and we'll be able to pursue our ultimate desires, and we won't be constrained by a 9-to-5 or whatever. And I argue that it actually might be a dehumanizing thing, because surely not all people are going to benefit the way that some people are going to benefit, right? And so I think it's going to be a utopia for some people. So we think about the disabled, we think about those with lower IQs, we think about those with a preference for actual physical labor, and people that don't want to be a manager, that don't want to work in an office. And you say, well, now you can't do those jobs anymore, and the robot is going to do it. or you're going to have to maintain the robot, et cetera. I think that's in a lot of ways dehumanizing to us, because in a lot of ways we get purpose and identity from our work, do we not? And so I think even in light of COVID in the last year, where people were not allowed to go to work, even though they may have made more money technically through unemployment and other means, although some of those are unethical, but different subject. I think in the heart of hearts of most people, they long to go back to work, because that creates a pattern for us, and we love patterns. We love, systems.
Purpose is important. Yeah,
it is important. And actually, if you study like identity crises and different things that we go through at different points of life, there's a major one when people retire, and it's related to some illness as well. And so people kind of deteriorate after retiring, and now they have more money, they have more time, they have all these things, but they're not as happy and fulfilled, because well, what do I do all day? And so I see this all the time in my line of work, and people are like, I just they get divorces, they go crazy, whatever it is, and you're like, what happened? And it seems to be the causing effect is that their patterns were so messed up because of retirement, and maybe, I don't know, but there's different things to it. But I think that's an issue that we're not thinking about, that maybe more leisure isn't the answer to our problems, and more money doesn't solve our issues as humans, and our creative nature to make, to explore, to be a part of a movement, and all those things are really important to us. And so, yeah, it's going to benefit some people for sure.
What about use of robotics to replace things like, children working in sweatshops, things like that? Yeah. I mean, certainly it's got its greater good as well.
Yeah, and so there's different kind of facets to this. There's the automation of work in the U.S., and well, even in those cases, what if that's their primary means of income? And
right, it's a screwed up conundrum. Yeah,
it is. And so you're taking away their only source of income. So what?
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I don't like that solution either. And I think in the West we should be more altruistic with our resources and help those people. And so that's a different issue. But so I think in some ways it can benefit us for sure. And so like in the healthcare system, I think there will be benefits to it for sure. But I don't think the answer is replacing all humans. I don't think that's the answer. And I don't think that's what automation will actually do. I think what it'll actually do is repurpose us. And so it's the repurposing that I'm mostly concerned about. So yeah, am I concerned about full-scale automation, which I think a lot of companies are pushing for? But because the reality of robotics is if you have an assembly line of robots and they mess up one piece, a human can come in and just tweak that one piece or remove it. Well, an automation line of robots, they're just going to take it through the whole process. So it's going to be, and this is what Elon Musk figured out when he tried to full-scale automate an entire warehouse. There's a lot of problems to it. And so what's going to happen is people are going to work less, and people might work only a couple hours a week. And so I have an issue with that as well. What do they do with the rest of their time? Are we going to
idle hands? Except the idle hands is the devil's playground, right?
Well, it's not necessarily that. What if they like their job? What if they had fulfillment in that job, or right. People who are a nurse or whatever? And
the industrial prison complex is a perfect example of this. When you teach people within the prison systems a job, a career goaling job, whether it's mechanics or carpentry or something to that end, or when we educate them, when they are given a purpose, when they are finally told that they are worth knowing things, it changes everything. Recidivism rates go all the way down. It's a huge deal to give a human being a job, a sense of purpose, and some knowledge.
Right. And, I talk to my wife all the time about, the Stepford movement and how terrible that was. And, some of our grandparents are kind of still in that ideology where the husband doesn't help with, chores, or, that's a woman's job. It's like, how dehumanizing is that my only purpose in life is to, fulfill your needs, and, just to, like, that's so terrible as a thought, but that's how people thought, and so are we going back to that in some ways? Like, you just show up to maintain this robot, and then you go home and do whatever you need to do, but your one job is to service this machine. And
that's interesting with hierarchy too. Does that mean that the machine is somehow better than you if you're servicing it? That's an interesting.
Yeah, I think it does. You're now working for the machine, or, and there's all types of stuff that's so fast paced and so quickly, like, changing the nature of work. And I mean, Amazon is just it's terrible, but it's a great experiment, because we're seeing how people are being hurt by these robots. They're psychologically pressed by the automation of their work and how they have these high quotas and everything. They're like, there's clocks everywhere if you go inside the factories and stuff. And there's just like this push for efficiency, and all these things are like, that has to be a stressful psychological environment, that
horrible.
if you don't meet these quotas, if you don't work like a machine, you're going to be replaced soon.
That's why they're peeing in Gatorade jars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And defecating in bags because they don't have time to stop.
Yeah. That's terrible.
This is terrible. Bizarre. It's so bizarre and crazy. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So going from the idea that automation, from your perspective, it sounds like you're basically throwing up giant red flags, saying this is a big warning bell. What could become of humans given an AI's capacity to run everything? Where does that leave us? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that a sum up pretty much of the labor part?
It is. And I think it's a red flag, but also time for pause, because we haven't quite hit those marks yet where we're ready to full scale automate or leave it to an AI to make those decisions, although they are in some capacities.
Yeah. How is an AI supposed to determine? You were going to say credit, and I cut you off, right? Mm-hmm. Credit score.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All the algorithms that determine everything about our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we live in a credit-based society, so you have no credit, you have no resources, so to speak, and then also another, face of the coin is that you're now putting AI and robotics as a new measure of what it means to be a worker and what a good worker looks like. So that's what we're saying. This is what we want in our workers. So you need to be like a machine. And I think that metaphor is very harmful to us because we're not machines. We're soft tissue and slow processors and all this stuff. And I think that's by design how we were created. And this is an argument against some, people argue against Christianity that, well, if there was a God, he would have made us different. But I don't know. I think how we are designed has worked pretty well to this point. And so if we have been on this earth for a long time, what does it say about us that we can continually multiply in the hardest circumstances, that our DNA and our code lives on, the human race progresses, so to speak. And so why are we so concerned with altering the code and changing everything? Because we think that the machine is the ultimate specimen of a worker or a being. And so I find that quite troubling.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit too. So if man is made in God's image, and God, who is an omnipotent being, decided that these creatures, humans, would roam the earth and then one day invent AI, didn't God know all along that AI was coming? And also, if AI is made in man's image and man is made in God's image, isn't that sort of a full circle moment that, in fact, AI is made in God's image just by de facto.
Yeah. I think technology in a lot of ways is a reflection. It can be, put it that way. It can be a reflection of God. It can be good. It can be generous. It can be life-giving. And so we believe God is a God of healing. So we believe in science. We believe in medicine. All those things, right? Those are important things. We believe that is kind of stemming from the Imago Dei, like the image of God, right? It's not talking about characteristics. Jesus. We don't know. We know Jesus wasn't white, but we don't know anything else about him. He didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes and all that stuff. But we do know a lot about his character. He was loving, charitable, all that stuff. And so when AI and robotics function in that way, then they are reflecting the image of God via the image of man. And I play with the idea, like, could a robot worship God? Will there eventually be a being in my church who has, full scale replaced a lot of the workers here in the factories, like, comes to church and asks me about God? I think that's a possibility. Sure. I don't have any reason not to believe that. I believe all kinds of interesting and miraculous things. So to me, it's not consistent to say, well, that's not possible, or, that's unbelievable. It's like, well, you believe, Jesus changed water into wine. You believe he walked on water and defied physics and all these things. So who am I to say that it's not possible? I think technology can be a bearer of God's image, but we have to be very careful that we don't make it a messiah, or what the Bible calls an idol.
An idol, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot more analogies to the idol metaphor than to or it reflecting God, because we make these machines to generate revenue. We make them to replace us so that we can do these things. But in a lot of ways, God gave us the authority to control and, as Genesis talks about, subdue and cultivate the earth. Could technology be part of that cultivation? Yeah, but I think kind of giving it over to a robot, like full scale, I'm going to let you go to work for me and all this stuff so that I can go home and, just enjoy leisure all the time. I think there's something wrong with that. And because, like I said, our purpose is to cultivate the earth and subdue it, and also rest and enjoy things. And so,
but if an AI was in the Garden of Eden, it would have obeyed the laws of God. So technically, if humans have original sin by very nature of being born, and AI is without sin by nature of never being born, one could argue that AI is closer to God than humans, which really makes your brain explode.
Yeah. And so that's kind of what interests me in the section about robotic souls. And so that's a question I played with a lot in my study. And I really wanted, at the beginning of my research, to say that there's no reason why a robot and a human can't be synonymous. And I think I proved myself wrong through looking at the idea of a soul, which a lot of people don't believe in anymore. But I still think there's philosophical reasons to believe in it, just dealing with identity and properties and substances and all those things. So anyway, I think my issue with that would be, I don't think robots at this point can have a soul unless God gives it the soul. And then all the issues that we're talking about are moot, because now it is its own being, and it's endowed with its own rights and all that stuff. And so
can its soul be programmed? Since none of us really know what a soul is, for those of us that do believe in a soul, I being one of them, and nobody's ever been able to say where the soul resides. Is it somewhere in the brain? Who knows? Because brain death people have experienced soulness outside of their corpus and then come back into body with after brain death and all that. So does that argue then that the soul is not even of the shell that is the human in general? And in that case, like you said, what if God decides that, hey, you know what, these AIs are interesting, let's give them a soul? Or maybe a soul just is something that becomes as an AI learns and develops and understands itself and its world outside of itself, which is much how a baby comes into existence, that maybe the soul develops naturally, and maybe it's an algorithm. Maybe we're all in a matrix and you and I are a computer program writing to learn itself.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think that is the most probable outcome, but I'm open to it for sure. And like I said, it's hard because a soul is a simple organism. And so this is going back to the philosophical side of it, trying to figure this out. And I don't think that it's like, people, especially robotic futurists and that type of thinking, is that you can just take my mind, download it to the cloud, and then put it into a new processor. I think the problem with that, and most of these people will say they don't believe in a soul. Well, what you're really saying is you don't believe in disembodiment, which you have to have in order to upload and download from a cloud, right? You have to have some type of point of transformation where you're in one shell and you're going to another. And so they kind of contradict themselves a little bit when they say they don't believe in a soul. They don't believe in disembodiment, but I believe I can upload my consciousness to this new shell. And so I think they're going to have a lot of problems when they actually try to do that. And it's not going to work out because no one really understands what the soul is in its essence. Now we kind of understand the function of it, what it does, and like you said, driving personality and giving all the different pieces how they come together. Just to put it plainly, and Aquinas is kind of where I go, and I think Descartes really confused people because he just used certain words to talk about animate objects and animals and all the other stuff. But I think he probably had a lot in common with Aquinas. I think Descartes gets a lot of bad rap, but I think he got a lot right. Just kind of the purpose and disembodiment aspect. I think he should have read Aquinas a little bit more. But anyway, I don't know. Like I said, maybe one day that'll be a reality for us, and I'll definitely be here. Like, yeah, this is what I was talking about, and they definitely should be warranted as persons, and hopefully we'll do that before that happens. And at least, if nothing else, it's caused us to rethink, about how we look at like the fetus and those type of beings, and even animals that are very intellectually developed, and how we treat them as well. And so I think all that kind of reflects on us, right? So whether or not we ever have artificial general intelligence, whether or not we ever have these type of robots that we're talking about today, really that doesn't matter so much. What matters is that we examine our perspective about how we treat entities in the present, and that we're open to redefining those concepts and those boundaries, because we've learned from the past, how we've treated women was not right. How we treated people who had different pigment color in their skin was not right. And that's all kind of been based around property rights, right? So economic greed is kind of one of these major barriers for people to be treated with equal respect and value. And so here we are again talking about who should be the recipient of these legal rights. And so to me, it's so obvious, like thinking about that, if we look at these different analogies through women's rights, animal rights, and all these things, and not to say that they're, an animal is equal to
I
woman.
get you. Yeah.
don't want to have any confusion there. But
get some letters on that one.
But that it should cause us to pause. Like, we haven't always got this right. And in fact, more often than not, we've gotten it wrong.
Right.
And so, what if this isn't actually, it has reason, it has the ability to feel pain and all these other things, which really, if you think about suffering, there's really not a good definition of what it is, right? And so, suffering could be, I didn't get the love and attention I should have had growing up, or suffering could be physical suffering. It could be psychological suffering. So we don't even really understand what that is, or we don't understand what the soul is. We don't understand what the mind is and in totality. But then we're over here saying that we believe that we shouldn't give rights to something we don't fully understand, how it's going to make decisions. We don't really understand what it is in its essence. And because we don't have a frame of reference for it, we just ignore it. And I don't think any good is ever going to come from that. And so I'm trying to wave the flag and say, hey, maybe we should cause for pause, look at this again and think about, should fetuses be regarded as, a person? Should certain animals be regarded? Whatever it is, have we always been right? No. We get this right? Probably not.
Well, then what happens in times of war when, people who've had nearly, all their limbs blown off, let's say, and rely on robotics to become a fully operational person again. And then let's say 60% of them is actually a machine at that point.
Yeah.
Then are they a human or are they a machine? That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's very platonic, right? That's what is the essence of a cup? When does it lose its cupness? 60%, 80%. And so, even if they're like just a head, right? Or they're a head and the rest of their body is a machine, I still think they're human. No, we're definitely cyborgs. I don't believe that any person living today is less than a cyborg, because all the technology we integrate into our lives. We take medicine to alter our body. And I don't know,
pacemakers. We have computers in our hands that operate us. We run our entire lives. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I wouldn't I'm not anti that. That's not what I'm saying. But okay, so this is a distinction I make sometimes. So is it wrong for somebody to take steroids? All right. No, it's not wrong if you need it to kind of get back to your quality of life. So, right, we take them for, different sicknesses or whatever. They have a good use. But, everybody doesn't always use what it's intended for. And somebody might take anabolic steroids to increase their testosterone because they want bigger biceps or whatever. Is that wrong? Yeah, I think that's wrong, because you're not using the technology to benefit your life. You're using it to enhance your life. And so that's kind of where I draw the boundary is, most of this is we don't need to work on things that are going to extend our cognition into some type of immorality. There's no point to work on that, in my opinion, because there are other issues we need to be working on. We haven't solved world hunger. We have climate change that we're not addressing and different things. So why are we giving so many resources towards this? And it's not just in robotics and AI. Most of science, grant space and science are working towards male pattern baldness. And I had a scientist tell me that, who is from
erectional dysfunction too. Erectile dysfunction is a big one.
That's where the money is, and so that's where the research goes. And these scientists are not bad people. They're not unethical or anything. They're just they're trying to find a job. They're trying to feed their children, whatever it is. And so they have to gravitate to where the grants are. And so they don't want to work on that. I don't know anybody that says I want to be a scientist to work on ED medication or male pattern baldness or whatever it is. But that's where the money is. And so likewise with robotics and AI, because so much of it is fueled by the war machine, it's fueled by the Department of Defense and all these other things. They're fully intertwined with its history and makeup. Why? So we can surveil, so we can assess targets, so we can have
we
more
can
precision.
kill without feeling something. I mean, that's a big thing. The drones, and you talk about this in the book about how when we send drones in to bomb, and kill all these people, there's a dissociation of humanity because this robot is doing the job for us. So what does that lead to on a moral level? Surely it protects our troops from being endangered. And you spoke of that earlier with the robot that you worked with that was a protector of sorts. And, what does that mean in the future? And you said, does that mean more wars? Because we have completely disassociated from what it means if we deploy AI to fight our battles for us. It's a great ethical question.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it leads to more conflict, and not just because of the disassociation, but because of it's based on irrational fear, right? The suspicion of fear is what it's called. And so if you go back to the argumentation here with why we develop these systems, it's basically what children argue. I need this piece of technology because the kid across the street has it, and I need it so I can, because he has it, is basically what the argument is. And so fear, suspicion of fear is like if you give two people like two opposing rooms and you say, I'm going to give you each a button. You don't know the other people in the other room. And the first person to push the button, you're going to get paid $100. But if the other person pushes it first, you lose $100. So basically, if you just sit there and trust that the other person is not going to attack you, right, you both win. But more often than not, if you put people in that situation, they're afraid. And so they're going to try to push the button first, supposedly. And I think that was actually on the Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises, where the Joker puts two different, he puts inmates on one boat and civilians on the other, and he gives them a bomb. Like, basically you have till this time to press a button. That's where that comes from. And I think that's really built and ingrained into our security and defense system logic, is that we have to develop this stuff because it's going to protect us. But that's actually propagating more development of war tech, and it's actually propagating more conflict down the road. And I think the war machine speaks for itself, especially in the US, that we are infatuated with it, addicted to it, just economically dependent on it. And it must be, because it is. It's just kind of continually propagating itself.
Yeah, and there's a nuance to it. I think robotics in military mirrors robotics in policing, right? There's a nuance. If you're pulling someone over and you're a robot, an AI, you will not understand the nuance of the situation. What if a woman stole a loaf of bread to feed her children to a robot that's just somebody that stole something? Do you know what I mean? There's like levels to the morality. There's levels to ethics. There's levels of understanding of what you're perceiving or not perceiving.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And we have to ask that question, because how is the system going to make those decisions? And we don't know. And that's kind of the nature of unsupervised learning, is we gave it an input, it gave us an output. We don't understand how it made that decision. And so this is where personhood comes into play. Legal personhood is that it kind of gives us another piece of leverage for arbitration and for negligence, as we're not really sure who's at fault. Is it the operator? Is it the system? We don't know. And so most likely what happens in that case is both are liable, right? And so, and that's kind of getting in.
Meaning, like, if you program a robot to kill and it kills, who serves time in prison? Is that what you're trying? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Or if it makes a mistake, and which has happened, right? And we as humans trust that the machine is going to, because it's smarter than us, is going to make the best decision. So we trust it. But when it makes a mistake, which is happened in 2006 and it kills a friendly, who's to blame?
Well, explain what it is, because people won't know what that means. A friendly. That's from our
yeah. So a friendly force, somebody that's on our side. It's called friendly fire. Like when you mistakenly identify someone as an enemy and harm them or kill them, then you're now responsible for that action. And that happens in the heat of the moment. It's happened multiple times in U.S. conflicts, and it actually happened in 2006, where a system identified a friendly aircraft as an enemy aircraft and released a missile and killed the pilots on board. And there were human operators behind it, and they just trusted that it made the right decision and they didn't stop it. And there's been other conflicts where a system identified something as a nuke. And if the person in charge would have said, okay, the system's right, we might have been in a nuclear situation, but it wasn't. It had made a mistake. And so that's a very terrifying scenario.
Yeah. And if you grant it personhood, if an AI is granted personhood, meaning it is absolving the human programmer from error, then it's sort of like we've given corporations and they have personhood now. Corporations exist in personhood land, which is so bizarre.
Yeah, well,
it allows them to absolve themselves of a lot of wrongdoing. They get away with so much more.
Well, it can be a shield, but it also can be a point of arbitration as well. And so there's a lot of need for reform in this system, and legal scholars will tell you that there's need for reform because we haven't thought about this and the way that the law was designed in law theory. It just wasn't built to incorporate every piece of technology that was going to come out. And so we're again at an impasse if we don't think differently about this. So we're not at anybody in my camp. We don't want to absolve the corporation from blame. And I think it's going to be a both and type thing. So the corporation would be liable, but also the entity would be liable. And maybe that could be a point of psychological treatment to say a robot kills your spouse or harms your spouse. And this might be kind of morbid, but what if it was, you were able to put it down and as punishment, not to like harm it or beat it or anything, but that, this robot was decommissioned because of what occurred to your spouse and part of its property or whatever funds that it was given will be now allocated to you. And so that is a very simplistic, scenario, but our hope is that people would not be taken advantage of. Otherwise, they will, because, like I said, tax law actually favors automation because we don't look at human work and automated work as the same, at least legally speaking now. And so, the corporation can just write off all types of benefits for automating work and using an AI, even though it may be causing so much harm. It may be, it may randomly select to fire somebody or not hire somebody based on race or whatever the algorithm decides. And so, that is causing harm, but the corporation is completely scot-free,
Yeah.
And so there's definitely two edges to the sword here, right? It can cut both ways. But I think the solution is not to just say the current legal system can handle it. I think a solution is we need to look again at how we do this. And I think there needs to be a whole new set of rights and how we deal with property and legal causation and all these things, and how we deal with blame, negligence, and all this stuff, liability, and all these technical legal terms, and to get people from different worldviews, different branches of ethics, different scholars to come together and think, how could we make a system where we introduce these robots and systems that are going to protect people first, right? We want to protect humans their flourishing and well-being, but also to propagate systems of virtue in our civilization that, we're not just using machine as a slave. We don't want to just create a slave for no reason. That just to me seems, that's not going to produce virtue. So why would we do that? We don't just want to say economics are the only reasons we do things. So we're just going to continue to innovate because it's going to make money. That's not going to end well for us, I think. We don't want to just make them as killing machines. We don't want to just make them as sexual companions, all this stuff. But sure, there are benefits to some of those creations and some of those creatures, but we also need to understand that we're liable to them as our creatures made in our image. We need to understand, and I think Mary Shelley captures this well.
Frankenstein, yeah.
Is that you don't just create something and then throw it away because you're disgusted by it, right? It wasn't what you thought it would be, right? And that story is very sad about the creature living in this shack and watching this family. And like, is that what we're doing? We're just going to create these children or whatever they are, and when we don't like them or it doesn't turn out the way we want, we're just going to cast it aside.
We become more like mythological gods, like the gods of the pantheon, where for them, humans were more like playthings, chess pieces. If we become the gods of the AI, then that is certainly an issue. Yeah. There's a Black Mirror episode that many of the Black Mirror episodes cover that, as does Westworld.
Yeah, they do.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, to be honest. And the tragedy of the monster, of the creature, feeling abandoned. And it's interesting because, again, it reflects back to you had a childhood where there was abandonment stuff, and that you have, your work separate from being an evangelical pastor, but your work with this writing is really diving into what it means. What does it mean to create this thing and then either turn your back on what it could become or let it overtake who you are?
Yeah, that's a lot to do with why I wrote it and why I resonated with the project and why I still want to research this question of, our life with the robots and hopefully it can have a positive outcome. Yeah.
Let's talk about sex robots and companion robots. You bring up some very interesting points. If an AI is created as a sexual partner, what does that mean for consent? And does that mean, what about people who go through life unloved and untouched? And, I have a friend who's a sex worker, and one of the most profound things she ever said to me was, I love the unlovable and I touch the untouchable. And that was really quite a moment for me to understand that, everybody deserves that. So where does that figure in with something that can't say no? Or do we develop a thing that has dominion over its sexual autonomy to say, like, oh, I'm not in the mood right now? What does it mean for child predators if we provide them with quote unquote child robots? Is that only feeding into their issues? And then what happens if they escalate? What happens if people have AI robots and then grow bored of that and then are so used to that passive sexual entity that then rape is the next step? And of course, these are all what ifs and who knows, but it's a fascinating thought experiment to go down these different routes.
Yeah, it was definitely the darker part of the research for sure. And, I'm working from a particular worldview about sexuality. And so the biggest concern that I found in some of this research was the advocacy for childlike sex robots. And, there's a whole different spectrum of things that you will see in the book, but I think the biggest concern is that it doesn't promote a virtuous life, and so one of the things about sexuality, from a biblical perspective, is that you need to understand how to deny the self and deny certain desires that you have, it doesn't address why you have those desires, right? And so I don't ever want to tell somebody, I don't believe that those desires are natural to you, because I think that they actually might be, and they are, and you may be attracted to a man, or you may be a woman attracted to a woman, or you may be a man attracted to a child. I take that seriously, and I think those are real feelings that you have. But the question is not, what do you feel? The question is, what do you do with those feelings? And that's what I'm most concerned about. And so, like I said at the beginning, my issue is not to condemn any person for their feelings, but I think there are good actions and bad actions. And so just to kind of narrow down to what the book talks about is, I have a problem with creating something for the sole purpose of being raped. I don't know what virtue that develops in a person. And now there are people, like you said, who they prefer that. They prefer the silicone doll, or they may prefer a robot that is detached in some ways.
Or they may not have a choice because this is the only way that they can experience intimacy.
Yeah. And so I think as a caveat to that, and I tell some people this, like, you're not less of a person even if you never experienced sex. And I think that's something so foreign to us, is that sex is a natural right. And I don't believe that it is. So I think it's a great thing. I think it's an enjoyable thing, but I don't see sexuality as my right to impose upon my wife, or that that has to happen, or vice versa. And so I don't think that's particularly the best way to look at it, as it's a natural right, which I think a lot of the argumentation for this stuff is based upon the premise that sexuality is a right. So the disabled have a right to sex, so we should, buy them escorts and different things, or someone with sexual deviance has a right to have that need met, and I don't buy that.
So I don't think if consent, I'm always for consent, and I would not, because you kind of went in a linear pattern as like LGBTQ and then to pedophilia, which I don't think the two are at all connected in my personal worldview. And I have a feeling you don't think that either. It just was sort of the linear pattern by which you spoke. But I want to make that clear, because I don't want people to think that you somehow lump those together. But yeah, consent is everything. And a child and an animal and somebody who maybe is not with a mental acuity or capacity, somebody in a coma, all these different things, they deserve to not have anything happen to them in a sexual and or violent nature of any kind. Not that anyone does, but that's a specific. If somebody isn't able to consent, all bets are off, baby.
Yeah, I agree. And so my concern with this, and likewise and I know there are people who make their living through sexuality, and I understand that. And so I don't know what the solution is for them. And honestly, some of that is just none of my business. I don't want to know about people's sexual life. That's your business. But the Bible does talk about sex, and it is a part of life, and an important part, I would think, for a lot of people, and something that kind of drives us in a lot of ways. St. Augustine said that the world marches to the beat of three drums: power, sex, and money. So yeah, I understand that, but I don't think some of these things are a necessary creation to address the need. And there's just so many areas for people to kind of speak into pedophilia, and they don't. And I think especially Christians, it baffles me that there's not more research on this. And there's only 2 places in the world that I know of that are actually trying to address the issue of childlike attraction. And so, for example, you can't self-identify as attracted to children without some legal ramification that you are now put on a predator list. Mm-hmm. So how are these men or women ever supposed to have some type of help for what is considered a legal deviance? They can't. There's nothing for them. And so part of the argumentation for a childlike sex robot is that it would provide a hurtful avenue for that behavior. And my argument would be it would actually propagate that behavior.
Yeah, I have a feeling I kind of tend to agree with you, as we know because of how porn escalates for many people, that it triggers parts of the brain that eventually will grow deadened and tired and need something even more exhilarating. So the logical next step would have to be a human.
Yeah. And I think too with these robots, it'll trick the brain probably once or twice, but it won't be as satisfying in progression. Like that's my assumption. I don't know. There might be people out there who say they have a extremely gratifying relationship.
Well, people marry their sex dolls, right? So there, people marry their cars. There's all sorts of quirks. We're not talking about the outliers, though. We're talking about in general the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And unless an AI is created that will eventually pass the Turing test, that can have this sort of autonomy and move throughout the world undetected as an AI, it has no way to say, nope, this isn't good for me. Yeah. But if it's not real, then does that matter? It's a confusing thing to think about.
Well, I think it does matter. I think it matters because of how it's helping that person and how it might be harming that person. And furthermore, if you really think about how it's going to be in reality, what's going to happen is, so just like with in-app purchases and all those things, what's going to happen is people are going to design them where they have upgradable features. And so you may be in the heat of the moment, whatever, and pop-up ad or whatever, and you have to now, upgrade for $9 or whatever to get this next feature. I think that'll probably be the reality. And I think that's also very harmful and deceitful on top of the actual enterprise that is the whole, so on top of that, you're already propagating greed. And then on top of that, you're unethical in how you are advertising and promoting your product.
But you're talking about how it hurts humans. I'm saying, is it possible, because this goes back to the whole conversation we've been having, is what is AI? Does it have personhood? And if it doesn't, if you can argue that it doesn't have personhood because only humans made in God's image have personhood, then it isn't harming this AI. But we've created this thing that is so human-like. That's where the distinction causes issue, but it doesn't cause issue with the AI. It doesn't care. You turn it off, it's off. You turn it on, it's on. It's the human that gets messed up or escalates or whatever. In theory, not always, but in theory, yeah.
Okay, let's just to clarify, personhood and humanness are not synonymous in my understanding. So, like, I wouldn't say that, and I think we use that in normal language, like personhood means only for humans. And I don't think that's biblically true. I think a person is a character in a story. And so biblically speaking, it could be a donkey, it could be an axe, could be the wind, whatever, humans, animals, both. And so
isn't that personification though?
It is, but it doesn't give us a detailed definition of what a human is either. So I think there's a broad understanding of what it means to be a person under that label. And so anthropomorphization of robots is a real thing. And I think that's by design. I think we're designed to see ourselves in other creations, other creatures. And likewise, personhood, it could be moral personhood. And so now we're going back to legal terminology. And so that's kind of where this breaks down, is we're talking about a legal idea. And my whole point is that we say, no, it can't be a person because it can't be a human. But yes, it can be a person, but it can't be a human. Yeah, I mean, it can be a person, just like a bridge, a dog, an elephant, a statue. It can be legally a person. It is a real possibility in time, space, and matter today. It exists. And so you're trying to break that illusion in modern thinking, because we use person and human so synonymously today that you like, we just use it as a substitute word, I think, without really thinking about what it means. And if you go back to the root word, it means a character, right? It means somebody who puts on a mask in a play. That is the root of the word. And so
persona,
if we're using it that way, then it makes sense to me logically that robots, trees, whatever, they can be persons, and they can be a very real person to us. And that's why I take it seriously that people might have a relationship with this robot, or they might and have been, emotionally manipulated, emotionally distraught, seeing how a robot has been harmed. So it's a real thing that we need to take seriously. But legal personhood from a legal perspective is about the protection of the entity. So it's a both and of what you're saying. And what I'm saying, it could be either way. So we could look at it as, okay, there are those who want to protect the rights of the robot in its physical sense, which most people aren't arguing that. Or we could talk about it as in how it's going to harm the human user by that perception and even deception, because it's made in its being to deceive us. That's what it is. And there's humans behind AI. There's resources behind AI. It doesn't just pop up out of a void. It's a real embodied thing. And likewise with these robots, people talking about they're going to replace sex workers. No, they're not. What's going to happen is there's going to be a sex worker in the room with the other sex worker to make sure that the rules are followed. You know what I'm saying? Like, it may take away from human men or women having to perform those acts, but they're still going to have to sit in there or in the next room and watch and observe. And so it's not really solving the problem. It's creating another issue. So why make it is my question.
I think about the Asimov laws, right? The robot can do no harm, right? And then it has to protect human sanctity of life, which right there in the first two, it's screwing up the whole war machine robot, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the third, I think, has to speak to, it's sort of like Fight Club. If you know about Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club.
Yeah.
Oh, man. This work is really something. I hope you continue it because it is quite fascinating. And have your parishioners read this book?
Some, yeah. So I got to give a copy to a widow. She's one of the older members of our church. She's in her 80s, and she said she wanted to read it. And so I haven't seen her in over a year. And so finally, she got vaccinated and all that stuff. And I was able to give her a copy the other day. And so that was a really sweet moment. And she actually, she prayed for me every week as I was writing it. And so it was a really nice moment to be able to deliver that to her.
I love that. Joshua, tell people how they can find you.
You can find it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. There's all kinds of places. You can find it everywhere except Norway. For some reason, they will not bring it to Norway. So it's
because they're all robots.
Well, I had a lady, a researcher in Norway, reach out, and she wanted to read it, and I couldn't even buy an ebook and send it to her because it was only available in English. Amazon's weird like that. I don't know what the issue is, but anyway, so you can find it wherever books are sold.
Robotic Persons, Our Future with Social Robots.
Yeah, you got it. You can find me on Twitter, JK Smith 8806, my Twitter handle. I'm pretty active on there. My website, joshuaksmith.org. Not as active there, but I do check it. And if you want to send me an email or whatever, you can buy the book there as well. Writing a second book now. That's kind of a more positive version of this book and talking about healthcare and kind of the ethics of looking at robots as persons and some things to be concerned about. So thankfully not writing about war anymore. or sexuality as much. So it's good, and enjoying it. And I don't know when that'll come out, but
keep me posted, because I can add it to the links page on heyhumanpodcast.com when it does come out, and I'll put all your information on there as well, so people can do a one-stop shop there.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Dr. Joshua Smith, thank you for being on Hey Human. This has been a lively, interesting conversation. I loved reading the book. I made a million notes and could probably talk about this subject until the great wee hours of the evening. I think it's endlessly fascinating, and it will continue to be so. I mean, there's no end in sight to the questions that are arising because of this topic. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening, everybody. Bye.
Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.